Thanks so much, Mike. I'm going to work to share my screen here. All right, hopefully that's all up. You can see my opening slide. So good afternoon. Thanks everybody for taking this time. I'm covering what I think is a very important topic. Oops, if I can keep my hands off my keyboard here. How to tell a better sustainability story to your customers and to the downstream consumer markets. Whether you're a manufacturer of kitchen cabinets or a dealer, showroom, this is a story I think that we can be telling as an industry that goes above and beyond any other sustainability story out there, and is really powerfully resonating with younger consumers and designers as well as I talk to them. So my name is Ken Bush. My company is called Material Intelligence, and we are working on this messaging initiative for anybody who works with wood-based materials. It's called Climate Positive Now. It's really a fresh science-based sustainability story for users of wood-based materials. And when I say science-based, it's all built on work that's been done by the Composite Panel Association and similar entities, life cycle assessments, environmental product reports, EPDs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of data behind this, but the Climate Positive Now is not in itself a certification. It's a framework for telling this very powerful story. And the way we're doing it with the KCMA is to talk about how much carbon is actually sequestered by the wood in the average cabinets in an average kitchen in North America. We did some math. What we believe is that the average North American kitchen is actually sequestering about 600 pounds of naturally captured carbon. And we'll get into carbon in a little bit, but that seems to be carbon footprint, CO2. This is the way most material and product categories are trying to express their environmental impact. So working with the Composite Panel Association, we also estimated that the North American kitchen and bath industry, every year, the materials being used are sequestering about 3 million metric tons of naturally captured carbon. That's a pretty big deal. Wood is the only story that can say that it actually stores carbon long term. So a little bit about me, my background. I started in the 90s in a magazine in this industry called Wood Digest. We launched another magazine called Laminating Design and Technology, and then I was the founding editor of a magazine called Surface and Panel as well. So I've spent a lot of time researching, learning about materials. And then in the early 2000s, I started working more with the interior design side of our world and creating certified educational content about materials for architects and designers. So that kind of opened a door, opened my eyes to a whole different way of talking about the materials used in cabinetry, in office furniture, and healthcare, and hospitality, et cetera, and taught me a lot about how to better communicate the role of materials and the benefits of certain materials in these markets. I also, for years, hosted a materials pavilion at the Neocon Commercial Interiors Fair in Chicago every summer. It was basically just a huge petting zoo of materials laid out in the format of an architectural library, like you might find in a major design firm, with experts representing these different materials on hand to kind of interface with the designers and the developers coming through this show who wanted to learn more about what kind of materials they might benefit from using in their projects. I literally had hundreds of conversations every year in that booth. A lot of them were with design students. And I get a lot of energy from hanging out with design students. Actually, I'm in front of them about once every month now, giving materials presentations to design classes at different universities around the country. And it's really educational to watch them interact with materials, but even more so to hear the questions they ask, because they're not just future specifiers, they're future consumers. So they're ideas, their questions, their skepticism is all very powerful feedback when we're trying to figure out how to talk about materials, and even now more so, talk about sustainability to these younger generations. So speaking of young people, a big part of what I've been doing in the last few years is creating educational content for architects and designers about materials, and it really all comes down to sustainability now. This is the way that major material suppliers are grabbing the attention of younger generations of designers. It has to start with the sustainability story. I had a design professor tell me once that if you don't start the conversation with how your product, your company, or your industry is saving the world, it's going to be a very short conversation. So I'm sure it's no surprise to anybody out there that the younger generations are very, very invested in sustainability. They want to do the right thing by the world. They want to make decisions that will improve their environment, their quality of life, not just in their own built environment, but sort of globally for their generation. So we're finding out through research that commitment to the environment will sway younger consumers from one company to another. If they find another company that seems to be a little more environmentally aware, they will gravitate toward that company. They're very loyal to companies that have a good environmental story. And when I say good environmental story, one that resonates with their own personal values, which are very, very deeply held. I'm sure we all have heard about young people who are refusing to drive cars, or not getting their driver's license until they're 20, or maybe even not even wanting to own a car ever. More than 9 in 10 of these young people would switch brands to another brand that is associated with a cause that they identify with. 72% would pay more for products made by a brand or a company that they trust. Building that trust is kind of the key element here. We'll talk about that in a little bit. 56% would pay more for products from a company known for being environmentally friendly. And this research so far is all from a Nielsen study that's a couple of years old now, so I'm thinking that these numbers are probably increasing. A more recent study we found shows that actually people working for companies that are invested in sustainability are more productive, 16% more productive than people working with companies that don't have a sustainability statement. Greenwashing is a big deal with younger generations. We have to be very, very careful. They're incredibly skeptical. When I'm in front of these classrooms of design students, I'm getting questions that I'm not really sure how to answer, as in, do these environmental carbon offset credits actually make a difference in the real world? I don't know how to answer that, because there's headlines now coming out more recently that's saying, yeah, that might not actually be making any sort of real progress toward a more sustainable future. 46% rank brands as more responsible for making sustainability progress ahead of local governments and consumer initiatives. Maybe you guys are seeing the same headlines I'm seeing as well. Consumer recycling is definitely not going to save us from ourselves. I live in Madison, Wisconsin. We got a note from our alder last summer saying, if you put one wrong piece of plastic in that recycling bin, that sends that entire truck full of recycling to the landfill. So by my calculation, that probably means just about every truck full of recycling is going to a landfill. And like I say, the younger generations are not ashamed of asking really, really tough questions and putting people like me on the spot when I'm in front of their classes. Another question I got recently was, if I buy this brand of tennis shoes, they say they're going to plant a tree. Do they actually do that, and does it make a difference? And right now, there's no way to account for, do they actually do that? But my research working on these educational articles for architects and designers basically says, yeah, planting a tree is great. It will start to have an impact in about 15 or 20 years when it reaches maturity and starts doing the carbon sequestration, the carbon capture that trees naturally do through photosynthesis. So another thing I learned from talking to millennials and Zoomers is that there is this thing called Earth Overshoot Day. There's an organization that tracks the amount of resources and the amount of waste that the Earth can provide and absorb each year. And they've added it up in this was 2021, this number, July 29th. So we have basically used up the Earth's entire ability to provide what we need to consume and to provide the waste we generate, or to absorb the waste we generate, by July 29th, which means every day after July 29th on that calendar, we are borrowing from the future. So at this point, we are actually using about 1.7 of Earth's capacity every year. And calculations are by 2030, if we keep going on this trajectory, we are going to be using 2 Earths worth of resources and landfill capacity, which is obviously the opposite of sustainable. Now, I tried to look for this number for more recent years, and what this organization has done now is broken it down to if everybody on the planet lived as if we were in this or that country, this would be Earth Overshoot Day. So the sad thing is, for North America, US and Canada, if everybody on the planet lived like we do, Earth Overshoot Day is March 18th. So it's a lot earlier in the year that we have to start borrowing from the future. If everybody lived like they did in Jamaica, I think that date is December 22nd. So that's a much more sustainable way of living. The biggest offender on the planet is the country Qatar. If everybody on the planet lived like they do on Qatar, I believe it's February 15th is Earth Overshoot Day. So this is something I had to learn from the young people, but this is what's on their minds. We are basically borrowing from the future. And, I'm in my 50s. We're borrowing from their future more than mine. So this is concerning to them. Another eye-opening experience was reading an essay by Clara Fang. She's an environmentalist, engineer, and a writer. She has a great essay out there called "Why I Don't Like Sustainability." A society that merely sustains itself is in trouble. It's on the verge of collapsing. And she's drawing comparisons to natural ecosystems where they always have to be regenerating, not just sustaining. Sustainability, it sounds nice, but the younger generations are thinking we need to do even better than that. So going beyond sustainability, the term I'm using for this initiative, and the KCMA is my first major proud backer, and I'm so happy about that, is climate positive. Climate positive. What does that mean? Climate positive is basically any product or activity that pulls more CO2 out of the atmosphere than it releases. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It's associated with global warming. The idea started out under the moniker of carbon negative. If we can be carbon negative, things will get better. But carbon negative as a phrase is pretty confusing. It's carbon. People think that's bad. That's not true, but it's a fact. It's an element in our universe. It's only 0.025% of our Earth's makeup, carbon. But people, us, by weight, are 18% carbon. Trees, wood, is 50% carbon, and naturally captured carbon at that. So carbon negative being kind of a confusing term. Climate positive started emerging in about 2019 as a better way to say carbon negative, but it also gives us the ability to talk about benefits beyond carbon. And in our industry, it's wise use of resources, forestry management, if you're using wood products, and if you're producing quality kitchen cabinets, it means longer lasting, better looking cabinets that people want to keep around a little bit longer. So the longer we can keep this wood in use, the larger the climate positive benefit to the industry and to the world. So Product carbon versus corporate carbon. I was actually working on one of these educational articles for a big TFL producer, a thermally fused laminate producer, a couple of years ago, looking for a better way to say carbon negative. And I stumbled on the fact that climate positive is a new term being used by IKEA to talk about their goals for 2030. Climate positive is also being used by H&M brands and some other global brands. If you do a Google search for it, it's showing up every day now. Municipalities are using the term climate positive in their requests for proposals. Different companies are talking about climate positive goals. Again, climate positive is not in itself a certification, but it's a great framework for being able to talk about your carbon, your resource management, your energy management, all of the above. So by 2030, right, IKEA wants to be climate positive by 2030, and they're doing that by slightly changing out their supply chain. They're having trouble with textiles coming out of India, so they're trying to work with those suppliers to get them a little more environmentally oriented. You probably heard they're adding solar panels to their retail outlets, and they're doing some other things I'll talk about in a second that basically turn their forests into greater suppliers of the materials and the products that IKEA is selling. So corporate carbon versus product carbon, right? 2030 is IKEA's goal for being climate positive as a corporation, as a company, and as they say, in absolute terms, which means they don't want to have to buy carbon offset credits. They don't want to have to write big checks to the Rainforest Fund. They want to be audited by 2030 corporate-wide and be shown to have be having a climate positive effect on our world, meaning that, once again, pulling more CO2 out of the atmosphere than they're releasing in all of their operations, manufacturing, retail, shipping, et cetera, et cetera. And what I liked about the IKEA's plans of being climate positive in absolute terms is that somehow they managed to sneak another Swedish brand into that statement, Absolute Vodka. So fishing around recently on an IKEA site, I realized, and I think that maybe this happened about 6 or 8 months ago, pretty much every product that has that's made of wood on the IKEA site has a "Our Take on Wood" story. And it's boilerplate. It's basically the same on every wood product page, but it is a beautiful way for them to kind of keep reminding consumers how important wood is to IKEA's design and production, how important wood is to people, how important it is to the planet. So IKEA is going full bore on the wood story, and I think it's okay for us to take a lesson from them. I took the climate positive term from them and added the now to it, because wood products are climate positive now by the definition of, do we sequester more CO2 than is released in the production of this product? As a material, wood and composite wood products are climate positive now. So companies can work toward carbon neutrality or toward climate positive. It's always a trajectory. I can't think of any company that is carbon negative yet, but we are working to get there. It's great. It's a great story to be able to tell. And I think a very important part of the story for companies to be able to tell is, like, this is a journey. We are working toward this goal. IKEA says 2030. Some other companies are 2040 or 2050. There are cities that want to be climate positive by 2050. But we don't have all the answers yet. And any company that's coming out and telling you, we've got this figured out, we're already there, just buy everything from us, that takes us back to greenwashing. Nobody believes that. But so what the healthiest approach to all of this is saying, as somebody who sells to the architect and design community or sells to consumers, we are working really hard to get there. We know we're doing some things right. We know we got a ways to go, but let us tell you about the progress we've already been making. So as I was in the process of stealing the term climate positive from IKEA, I decided it might be a good idea if I got in touch with them and just talked to them about it. So I scored an interview with the global wood sourcing manager at IKEA, Ulf Johansson, and really dug into what they are doing to become climate positive through their use of materials, right? Not the corporate energy policies, shipping, et cetera, but just purely on the materials. And of course, you know, Sweden's a forest country, very much identified with the brand of IKEA. And Ulf told me, you know, wise use of resources is in IKEA's DNA, because mainly we really hate the waste. And so digging in a little bit deeper about some of the materials they use a lot of, namely composite wood products like particle board and MDF, Ulf said, you know, particle board was developed to take care of the waste from the sawmills. In the 1940s, 1950s, when we were harvesting wood out of the forests, the North American, the Northern Hemisphere boreal forests, for things like siding and lumber and flooring and, you know, architectural trim, half of that tree, half of that fiber was still left on the forest floor because it just wasn't substantial enough to make any of these other products. So we came up with ideas like, well, what can we do with plywood? What can we do with particle board? What can we do with MDF? And suddenly, instead of using just half of that wood fiber, we are using 99%, actually over 99% of the harvested fiber. But yeah, Ulf's point was particle board was developed to take care of the waste. And then he went into a long story about IKEA's meatballs and how, don't tell anybody this, but, you know, pretty much very little of an animal comes out of the back end of a meatball factory. They make use of absolutely everything. And anybody who's traveled in Germany too knows they find really tasty ways to use every part of the pork and beef. So this is kind of, you know, I'm learning from IKEA's story. They do a ton of consumer research globally. They understand what resonates. Obviously, they've got a feel on younger consumers like nobody else. But the other side of it is, you know, they're building this story about how they're making the most responsible use of wood. I mean, IKEA is working on wood-based solutions for couch cushions, right? Getting away from the foam materials and actually creating couch cushions out of wood-based materials. They're also working on a wood lignin-based glue system because, you know, most of the current glues out there are petroleum-based products. Ulf told me that 6% of IKEA's global carbon footprint is actually just glue. So that's, and on their scale, I don't even know how much that is, but they obviously think it's important enough to be addressing. So they are looking for wood-based alternatives. So leaning into the forest as much as they can to tell an increasingly better climate positive story. But yeah, speaking of stories, so I worked a couple of years ago with a group that had been hired by Marriott Hotels to streamline the green specification for all of their different development and design teams. And it was a pretty interesting process. We developed, this company had developed algorithms to basically boil down all these eco labels and certifications and reports into a very simple scoring system that that Marriott design teams could trust to make the most sustainable choices, right? So you'd get a product, maybe it's two different flooring products. One has a rating from 0 to 200. That's got 150. The other one's got 155. They can look at these two products very similar in the what Marriott was calling the health and wellness factor. And with each of these products came a one-page story, a dossier on how that product achieved that simple score. So instead of going through a documentation binder that's this thick, they had one sheet, a score and a story. And we quickly found that the story was becoming part of IKEA's marketing because they had done enough guest research to know that, let's say they did this at a Marriott Courtyard in California, they put a table tent with a QR code in every room, scan this code, and find out what's sustainable about this property. And through their research, they figured out that the people who interacted with this code and got the green story about that Marriott Courtyard had 150% higher satisfaction rate with their stay and 150% higher guest loyalty rate to the brand. So that was when IKEA's top brass basically said, well, that's everything we need to know about ROI and pursuing a more sustainable process for building out our hotels. One of the people I worked with on this project is Lara Shorthall. She was a designer before she joined the Marriott team for Starwood Hotels. She created the Aloft brand, the Element brand, 4 Points, and a fourth one that I can never remember. But I worked with her to give a presentation to an entire room full of people who call on commercial designers like Lara in hospitality, in healthcare, in commercial, and coaching them on how to do a better job of telling their product story to these people who can buy, you know, hundreds of buildings worth of cabinets or wall covering or HVAC or whatever. And the thing that stuck with me from Lara's presentation is she said, you know, if you're coming to me and you want to sell me your cabinets, and I ask you, what is sustainable about this product? And you tell me, oh, it's on the website, go have a look. It's all documented there. Lara said, that meeting is over at that point. She says, if you can't tell me the story as a salesperson sitting in front of me about what's sustainable about your company or your products, then I know it's really not part of your company DNA. I'm pretty sure the top brass is not buying into this message. And so I don't want to do business with you, because I want companies that live their story, where everybody in the company can tell that story. So that kind of blew my mind when I heard that. I've never forgot it. So I'm going to be sharing this part of my presentation for the rest of my career, I think. And one of the companies Lara mentioned was a commercial carpet tile company called Interface Flooring. She made the point to say that when she would do a plant visit, and designers love plant visits, by the way. If you guys are bringing designers through plants, that's a huge win. Designers and students love to see how things are made. But she was in an Interface Flooring plant and was so impressed that even the fork truck driver could tell the Interface Flooring sustainability story. And so the most recent iteration of their story, now Interface Flooring is the company that invented the idea of taking back commercial carpeting and recycling it into new carpeting. Totally changed the industry. That's got to be 25 years ago now. Within 5 years, if you wanted to sell commercial carpeting to commercial designers, you had to have a take back program, a recycling program, or you were no longer in the game. So Interface really shifted that entire industry. So I was talking to a designer about 6 years ago about products she loved to use in every single project. And she brings up Interface Flooring. And I said, is it because of the take back program? And she said, no, it's about the net effect. Do you know about the net effect? And I had no idea. She could tell this story. It took her 10 minutes. She knew it so well. But the net effect in Interface Flooring is basically Interface Flooring is setting up microbanks in fishing villages in Southeast Asia to loan the local fisher people enough money to get big enough boats to go way out into the ocean, capture drifting fishing nets, drag them back, turn them, chop them up, clean them up, and sell that fiber to Interface Flooring, who then turns it into carpeting that ends up in like the Milwaukee Art Museum. And it just so happens that the flooring looks like the surface of the ocean. A huge commercial success for Interface Flooring. They actually ran a promotion along Lake Michigan during the Neocon show that I mentioned earlier, where they laid 4 kilometers of fishing net along the shore of Lake Michigan just to get local media attention. And then they had an excuse to tell their story. And it's been a very powerful story. They're incredibly successful. The designer who told me that story knew it so well because it resonated with her values. She was totally emotionally invested in telling this story because it made her world make sense. And as she's telling me the story, not a word about cost, not a word about durability, not even a word about design, just all the feel-good story of a company that is pulling fishing nets out of the ocean, that's killing wildlife and turning it into carpeting. So as I'm listening to her story, I'm also kind of thinking, wow, my God, the woodworking industry has a story that's at least as powerful and probably even more true, because anybody who knows what it takes to make and install commercial carpeting, still very hard on the environment. And what I believe Interface Flooring is doing with this is getting ahead of the tough questions. If they can come at designers and consumers with a story that feels so good and sounds so good, the customers don't turn around and ask the hard questions. They kind of go off happily thinking that this is a material that they should probably be buying. So how do we translate this to the wood industry? So this is the landing page for the website climatepositivenow.org. This is where we host our version of the net effect story. It's really about celebrating products that go beyond sustainable. The only product that can actually say that is wood. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple of these slides. This story again is hosted on that website, but this is part of the story that the KCMA would like to be telling, and we would love all the members to be telling the story as well, because it rocks. It's an awesome story. Nobody else can touch it. And like I said earlier, it's based on solid science, conducted by the Composite Panel Association, the Wood Forks Products Lab, which is here in Madison. And basically any scientist who study wood fiber, carbon capture, will go, yeah, this is the story. Sadly, our industry, the suppliers of these materials to you guys, haven't done a great job of getting on the same page and helping you tell this story until now. This is our movement. This is the goal of our movement. So this is a story that really only one material can tell. Nature, or wood, is nature's perfect carbon sink. I think we all were supposed to have learned this in 8th grade earth science, right? Photosynthesis. Trees absorb CO2 from the atmosphere as they grow. They take the O2, the oxygen, and release it back into the atmosphere. That's why they call forests the lungs of our planet. They provide us the O2 that we need to breathe and survive. What they do with the carbon is another great part of the story that not too many people understand. The carbon molecules that are captured are turned into the woody mass of wood. And I mentioned earlier, 50% of wood is carbon, naturally captured carbon. Literally, trees are using solar energy and water to scrub the air and to pull the carbon out of the atmosphere, where it contributes to greenhouse gases and global warming, pull it out of the atmosphere and turn it into a very workable and an environmentally friendly material that we can build everything out of, right? I mean, humans have co-evolved with wood. It was our first source of heat, of light, shelter, transportation, music. I think if we didn't have trees on this planet, we'd be a much different looking species right now. So composite wood panels actually store more carbon than is released in their production. And this is all because of the density of the fibers in particle board and MDF versus solid wood or softwoods. Again, we're measuring the amount of carbon stored in these materials by weight, 50% by weight. The more tightly packed you have your fibers, the heavier the panel, the more carbon you're storing. Every sheet of particle board is actually storing 40 pounds of carbon. Average sheet's about 80 pounds, right? MDF, 43 pounds. Now, in the case of particle board, that amount of carbon, 40 pounds, is 14 pounds more than the carbon that was released in the harvest and the production and the conversion of those materials into components that you guys are using every day. So 26 pounds of carbon was what we spent, right? What we released in creating these materials. That extra 14 pounds is the climate positive amount, right? That's where we get the carbon negative measures, or again, more effectively put as climate positive. So that is a net negative that actually, or a net positive that actually more than offsets the laminating and the turning it into a cabinet and even the shipping. The Composite Panel Association is tracking all of these extra inputs that are required to put a cabinet in a home. And even after all of those steps, this extra sequestered carbon still means that kitchen cabinet, that finished cabinet, is still a climate positive material, a climate positive product. Composite wood panels actually begin life as a recycled project. So this is where we get out of talking about just pure carbon, but we can say, as I mentioned, the wood fiber that used to be burned or landfilled, the stuff we couldn't use in lumber, flooring, siding, and molding, is now being productively used in composite wood panels. So rather than just rotting or burning and releasing its carbon back into the air, if we turn it into a panel that becomes a kitchen cabinet, for as long as that kitchen cabinet is in use, that carbon is kept out of the atmosphere. So that's long-term carbon sequestration. And that's when we referred to earlier as wood as nature's perfect carbon sink. It basically does this just on its own. We don't have to do a whole lot of managing of forests. We don't have to water the trees. We don't have to fertilize them. They just want to grow. And in doing so, they are constantly capturing CO2 and storing the carbon element for as long as that wood is left as a finished product. And there's more research coming out from the CPA right now that basically says even if it's landfilled, that wood continues to store carbon maybe for hundreds of years. So we're pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. We're keeping it out of the carbon cycle, which is how they describe how carbon moves through the atmospheres and the oceans and the geological formations and through living beings. The longer we can keep carbon out of that cycle, the more breathing room we get, I guess, when it comes to global warming. So again, because we're going beyond just talking about carbon with the use of climate positive, we can talk about forestry management and healthy forests, keeping forests young. Younger forests absorb more oxygen than older forests. You know, we're hearing about the forest fires in the Northwest every year. Well, it's just about everywhere now. By managing forests to protect them for recreation and human habitation, we have basically kind of ruined the natural rhythm of the ecosystem. The forests where we get our materials for cabinetry, for particle board, for MDF, were literally designed by nature to be decimated every 40 or 50 years by fire or insect damage. That clears out the older trees. It makes room for new trees to grow. Younger trees are absorb more carbon, are a more attractive environment for wildlife, et cetera, et cetera. So managed FSC forestry, the whole intent there is that we go in and we mimic the natural rhythms of nature's destruction of these forests, pruning, let's say. So we harvest trees at maximum yield just before they start to die. They quit absorbing carbon, they quit producing oxygen. We get them when they have the most lumber to yield and when they're going to stop being productive in that ecosystem. So I had a student when I was going through this part, she goes, so in other words, instead of hugging trees, we should be hugging the whole forest. I'm like, that's exactly it. And composite wood panels with engineered decorative surfaces can outlast solid wood in tough applications. Again, I spent a lot of my world in the commercial design spaces. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten into the elevator of a relatively new hotel. Somebody has used a wood veneer on the panels, and it's after just a couple of weeks, it's already all chewed up and kind of looks wrecked. More durable decorative surfaces like TFL, melamine boards, right? HPL, 3D laminates, and some other new emerging materials like polypropylene and PET. They give us a lot more durable surface to protect that composite wood core for longer. So we are not replacing them as often. We are keeping them in use, once again, extending the sequestration of carbon. So we're not saying don't use any real wood, right? People love it. But a multifamily developer, I just did a story on an 80-story apartment and mixed use building that went up in Chicago, 800 and something apartments. They're not going to use a solid wood or probably even a veneered product because, well, several reasons. These properties don't have anybody who can take care of solid wood if it does get damaged. It's just not the labor or the skill out there. And of course, it's a cost advantage too. So they're using durable TFL and 3DL materials, but still using tons and tons and tons of composite wood. So still sequestering that naturally captured carbon. So I'm so proud to be able to count the KCMA as a member in this, as a partner. We are working to promote the benefits of the members, the benefits that you're bringing to residential markets. And I'm sure some of you probably also sell to apartment developers and whatnot. So this is a story that crosses over from consumer to designer. It's a very simple and easy story to tell. We need to kind of be telling this at the manufacturer level, at the kitchen dealer level, at the kitchen designer level. I participated in a panel discussion at KBIS a couple of weeks ago. Sustainability is good business is what it was called. And I talked about what I'm talking about with you right now. And I had several young designers come up to me afterwards saying, how come we're not hearing this from anybody else? This would be so great for me to be able to convince my customers to work with these kinds of materials. So this is our mission here, is to try and get everybody singing from the same choir book and telling the same story about the sustainability of the materials you guys are building with. This is a story that ran in KBB Online recently, and we're going to be seeing more of these. And full disclosure, I'm also working with retail designers. I'm working with laminate flooring producers. I'm working with business furniture, office furniture producers, and healthcare furniture producers. This climate positive now story is going to be taking hold, I think, in several different markets. But I have to say, the KCMA is in at the ground floor. This is an effort we're just getting off the ground. You can see our sponsors on our webpage. If you go to the sources page, we are talking about, get the right direction here. Well, let's see here, my slides. So I'll get back to this one, but these are the users that we've signed up so far. Again, this is just getting off the ground. These are the material suppliers that are behind this. And again, that's going to be a growing list because they obviously want to help you with your message. Everybody needs to be, like I say, telling the same story. So frankly, it doesn't sound like greenwashing because the story is so good, it almost is too good to be true. So if we can get enough of our value chain speaking the same language and sharing it with the design community, the customers, the retail outlets, this is how we gain traction. And quite honestly, because we're working with wood products, nobody else can tell this story. So this is why I say the world's greatest sustainability story is yours, because you are selling wood-based materials. Again, back to this slide. This kind of messaging has a lot of impact. I kind of shopped it around several conferences and meetings and using it in magazine articles that I'm working on. This has punch, and especially your kitchen is probably storing 600 pounds of naturally captured carbon, right? And the secret is we're not asking people to make a big conversion from what's already going on. We're just asking them to be more aware of the good they're doing, the good you're doing, by working with wood-based products versus, aluminum, concrete, steel, glass. Yes, all of those things have their place, but if we can lean into the benefits of wood, that gives us just such a great story to tell. And the carbon, we've been talking about carbon, right? So carbon footprint is the common denominator. I'm trying to get people to start saying carbon denominator, but it's how people measure products and compare them. Carbon footprint, embodied carbon, most people believe they mean about the same thing. Some people take issue, but carbon footprint is a standard way to refer to it. Aluminum has a carbon footprint of 18,009 kilograms of CO2. That's the amount of CO2 that is put into the atmosphere in the extraction and production of aluminum, a cubic meter of aluminum. The same volume of wood has a negative carbon footprint. Again, we're talking about the sequestration of carbon, more carbon than is released in the production of that product. Negative 1,290 kilograms of carbon footprint in wood. So that's pretty huge, although the negative is still confusing people. So that's why we're trying to move toward climate positive. So this is just a slide I like to use when I'm in front of students. We talk a lot about forestry in those presentations. Northern boreal forests are where we get most of the wood for our materials. How long does it take this forest to replenish? About 45 or 50 years. As opposed to a marble quarry, how long does it take this to replenish? I always ask for guesses, and they're wildly off the mark, but I did the research. 4.453 billion years. Basically, the Earth of the planet, the age of the planet. So, this pitch kind of ends with, if you can use a 3D laminate marble look over MDF, you're doing the planet a much bigger favor than if you're using solid marble. So you got a great story to tell. My job is to help you tell that. We would love for the KCMA membership to become part of this movement. We have this beautiful logo we had designed. We have a social media toolkit that helps you kind of control the language as you're spreading the word. We want you to be able to use our logo on your site, on your packaging, in your marketing. We want to put your logo on our site as a leader in this movement. And we are offering a special rate, very low rate for KCMA members who want to sign up through the end of February. So this is what the logo page looks like. Again, we are hoping to make that a lot more populated. We'll be dividing these up into different categories of materials as we get enough people signing on to fill out those columns. And that is what I have. Thank you so much for your valuable time.
Great, thank you, Ken. And that is a fantastic story. A couple questions. One, you had that one slide you just showed about the carbon stored in kitchens. Do you have a breakdown? I don't remember if you said it or not, of the average kitchen, how much they're storing?
I did the best research I could, and I'm hoping maybe some of you guys can help me with this, but we found an average number of panels, composite wood panels, that are used in a standard kitchen. And the weight ended up being about 1,200 pounds. Divided by 2, that's 600 pounds of stored carbon. So there may be more details we could add to that. I would love to do that. And I would love to also perhaps maybe work with some of your manufacturer members to estimate the amount of carbon that their company is storing through their use of wood. So there are ways to add real numbers to this to make it more visceral. We can get very precise. And I'm happy to collaborate with any of your members to help tell that story and make it part of their own sustainability statement.
Okay, this is sort of a two-part question. You talked about the questions that the younger generation is asking, and they're skeptical. I imagine you've met some skepticism, regarding this current story. And the specific question then is to address the greenwashing, kind of effect. Do you have an objective environmental scientist expert / peer-reviewed, studies, to review and validate the studies that you're referencing?
Yeah, absolutely. I work very, very closely with the president of the Composite Panel Association, Andy O'Hare, who came out of the petroleum industry and came out of the fertilizer industry, and his experience in battling really terrible sustainability challenges and telling their story. He is way into finding new ways to talk about sustainability for his composite panel members. And we're talking about the big companies you guys all know: Uniboard, Arauco, Tafisa, Stevens Wood, all those guys. They have produced over the years several life cycle assessments, which is the standard way that the design community asks to have everything documented. I mean, these are done by like Deloitte and these other auditing companies. So they've got an LCA for MDF, they got an LCA for particle board. They are working, and that's cradle to gate right now. So through the production process, they have measurements of the inputs, the carbon inputs further downstream. They are working on new LCAs that are cradle to cradle and even cradle to grave. And they also have, they've done some calculations for the long-term storage of carbon by all the panels by volume that their members have manufactured, I think over the last 26 years or something like that. So, but my favorite science behind this is the 8th grade earth science, where we learned about photosynthesis and trees capturing carbon. That's where we can start the story, and most people will go, I remember that. And then you can build on the story from there. But yeah, I haven't found anybody who could poke any holes in this story. So it's all based on real world research and accredited, working with universities and research firms.
Yeah, I know from talking with you, Ken, you sort of go through the process of why can't I tell this story? Why, what's wrong with the story? And you haven't been able to find an answer to that. So speaking on that sort of subject again, what are some of the tougher questions you have been asked about this, and how do you kind of answer them?
Right now, and this is total, again, transparency is very important in the way we tell this story, right? Because nobody's going to believe you've solved all the problems, and it's hard enough to get people to understand the carbon capture and sequestration benefits of wood, period. But the toughest problem our industry has is talking about end of life, right? We know that there are office furniture chair companies that are all involved in circularity. I'm sure you guys have heard about circular economies, circularity, basically designing a product from the beginning to be reused. So you can disassemble these office chairs, use the hardware, use the wheels, use the fabric. For us in the cabinet industry, it's a little tougher because there's a certain amount of demolition involved when a cabinet comes out of a house. There are organizations like Renovation Angels who are actually trying to repurpose whole components from kitchens and resell them. There are algorithms where you can pull panels out of a renovation, type in the size of panels you got, and then there are public domain plans for other products. If you can get that panel to somebody with a CNC, that panel that can be remanufactured into children's desks or shoe organizers or something like that. Tons of logistics involved with that. It's not perfect yet. Honestly, the Europeans are a little bit ahead of us on this. They're able to actually recycle panels into new panels, but that's because they don't have the CARB2 formaldehyde emission limits that we do in the States. Anytime you try and recycle a particle board into particle board, the formaldehyde content increases, and it bumps us up above allowable limits. Europe doesn't have those really stringent levels, so they can recycle panels into panels. So it's a little bit of like, what is going to make the biggest positive impact from 30,000 feet, rather than how we handle these specific little elements and trying to get this all to happen together. But the bottom line is wood, right, naturally self-regenerates. We're not going to run out of wood. If I quit mowing my lawn here in Madison, Wisconsin, in 23 years, I'm going to have a forest. So what happens, if we can't reuse these wood panels afterwards? Andy O'Hare from the CPA basically says, I think landfills get a bad rap in this because the wood will not decompose in an anaerobic environment. It will keep that carbon captured for hundreds of years. If you have a laminate or a finish on it, most of those materials are inert. They will not turn into poison in the landfill. They will just sit there. So it's not the sexiest or the most beautiful story, but it is a story that, if we can tell it right, lessens the fear of, oh my goodness, this stuff is going to poison our drinking water or explode. That's not going to happen in a landfill with wood-based products like kitchen cabinets and doors.
Ken, your video has disappeared. I guess you're saving electricity, turn your lights off, which is good.
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Hi.
There you go.
Sorry about that.
So just we'll wrap it up on this, but kind of like you were saying. So I mean, we're probably the same age. Growing up, you wouldn't be caught dead, no pun intended, wearing a seatbelt, but you get hammered with that message and click it or ticket and peer pressure and all the stuff. And now my kids, it's just the first thing they do is put on a seatbelt. So right. I think part of what you're trying to get at here is, if everyone's telling this message from all different sides, it's going to resonate, and it's going to be something people are asking for versus, anything else.
It's a critical mass kind of a thing, right? I mean, ideally that logo, our Climate Positive Now logo, I would love to see it on packaging. I would love to see it on samples in showrooms. I'd love to see it on everybody's social media. I would love to see it in your email tags. It is basically a conversation starter. And if we do this right, Mike, it's a very easy story to tell. The wood products we use are storing more captured carbon than is released in the process of us turning it into a product. And that is good for the environment, it's good for people, and it's good for the future of the furniture industry too.
Great. Well, thanks again, Ken. And we will get the recording and slides out to everyone who's registered. And, we're excited to have a partnership with you. And this is a fantastic message. And I think it's a real strong one, obviously, for the industry.
I appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to working on one-on-one with your members to build this story out for their own markets. And I guess one last thing I learned in giving these presentations is companies. I gave a presentation to the executive briefing conference. Hayworth came up to me afterward and said, "We think this story could help us get a lot more young people interested in working in the woodworking industry." And so they launched a whole initiative to actually promote sustainable production, use of sustainable materials as a way to recruit talent. So there's a whole nother angle I would have never thought of, but also apparently important. So